Welcome rabies and germs to the Golden View, here on the Masochist Gaming Network. And as always, I am your host, Nicholas McConaughey. And for this day's edition, much like the last, we'll be taking a look at, in my opinion, one of the most underrated games of all time. Last time around, that was Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. This time, however, it's Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus for the PlayStation 2. When I say that a game is overlooked, it's not as much to say that it's obscure or unknown to the masses, but more to say that I don't believe it gets the mainstream attention that it deserves. I say this because Sly Cooper isn't necessarily an unpopular game, but for the positive reviews that it got from critics, it was never one of the major exclusive games from Sony, or at least it never felt that way to me. The game is one of a different breed from what we had seen at this point in a long while. In the late 80s, when video games were slowly but surely beginning to truly grow to prominence, the industry soared with a vast repertoire of games, but the one that most comes to mind is Super Mario Bros., which eventually led, of course, to Nintendo's rival Sega creating Sonic the Hedgehog in the early 90s. Rightfully so, these games were and still are highly acclaimed today. They didn't have much at all in the way of story, and when they eventually tried to incorporate story down the line, it just didn't feel right. They were mind-numbingly creative, fun entertainment. I believe that the quote-unquote torch had been passed eventually to Spyro and Crash Bandicoot, or at least that's how I choose to see things. They had a similar direction about them, storyline not too much in depth, enough to get by, while the gameplay is usually what drew people in. They were also games with relatively simplistic animation, that even if they were somewhat kiddie, still were easily accessible to adults. Anyway, what I'm carrying myself to say is there are several contenders for the next set of games like this. I think those games are the Ratchet & Clank, Sly Cooper, Jak and Daxter, and Ty the Tasmanian Tiger series myself. Mind you, I don't think they're still today's Mario and Sonic, more as to say that they followed Crash and Spyro, and are now having their slot filled by another set of games. I guess that in my own rambling sort of way, what I'm trying to say is I believe Sly Cooper should have been held in a higher regard than what it was. Fortunately, a fourth game is upcoming, which is why I chose to see how it all began. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, for those that aren't aware, is a stealth platforming video game created by Sucker Punch Productions. Just hearing the name of the company itself, I'm not really familiar with it. However, after doing some scavenging, I found out they're responsible for the infamous series. Other than that, in a game called Rocket, the Nintendo 64, the Sly series is all that they're responsible for. It's not an illustrious list, but I think it's safe to say that they're off to a good start. Sly Cooper was released on the Sony PlayStation 2 in 2002, and was followed by two sequels, Sly 2 The Band of Thieves, and Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves. You can buy the Sly collection on the PS3 to get all three of these games in the future if you choose to do so. The story begins with an explanation for the characters and the quests that they're having placed in front of them. Sly is a member of the Cooper family, an enriched family known for their inexplicably large amount of success in thievery. The family was so illustrious that they formulated the book, archiving all the tactics and methods that each Cooper had done. The Thievius Raccoonus, it was called. An admittedly dim-witted and silly name, but it hardly needed to be anything more than what it was. Unfortunately, the pages were scattered around frantically, and Sly Cooper, being the last known heir to the prestigious book, must unravel the whereabouts of each page. Targeting a group called the Fiendish Five for the pages, he travels alongside his friends Murray, the dim-witted but lovable hippo that drives the van, and Bentley, the infinitely intelligent turtle that works as the oracle to Sly Cooper's Batman, helping him figure out clues and collecting information on happenings. The story on paper really isn't anything to get too excited about. It's very simple, of characters with traits that we've already seen many times. But the game provides enough style and pizzazz to shield its inefficiencies. The cinematography and the scenery probably helped to make the story better than what it was, painting an atmosphere necessary for this type of story. For everything that it is and everything that it isn't, I'm giving the story a rating of 7.5 out of 10. The graphics initially are probably what brought this game up to the plate. The game had stylistic visuals and an artful way of depicting its atmosphere that really enabled the characters to be brought to life. It retained a sort of feeling similar to that of Ratchet & Clank or Crash Bandicoot, but brought with it its own sort of black film feel to it. There's little moments where the cutscenes feel out of whack, or the scenery ever gets in the way of the action, which is always a plus. Ultimately, I give the graphics and overall illustration of the game a solid 8 out of 10. One other thing that truly assisted the atmosphere and the scenery was the music. The music usually provided an enchanting sound that benefited the game. I couldn't imagine the graphics popping out quite as much had it not been for the other contributing factors. The controls of this game aren't very complex, but honestly it turns out to be kind of a good thing at the end of the day, because you can pick up a controller and almost immediately start going through levels without any problems whatsoever. The controls are also incredibly responsive. There are very little moments where I find myself getting frustrated with the game, or anything that I believe to sincerely be an inefficiency of the game itself. I jump where I intend to jump, I don't constantly walk off edges because of oversensitive controls, which is more than I can say for the first Crash Bandicoot game, but that's a discussion for another time. The only thing that bothered me was the lack of use in the controller's capabilities. Many buttons went unused in this game. The L1 and R1 button both pulled out the binoculars, something that I think R3 should have been saved for. Then R2 and L2 swapped between a special move that you could use with the triangle button. Circle didn't do much of anything either until towards the end of the game. I don't mean to sound like I'm nitpicking or, making a big deal out of nothing, and I realize absolutely nobody cares about this but me. However, I just think that if we use those other 5 buttons more productively, we wouldn't have had to keep the special moves isolated to just using the triangle button. The controls for their slick and tidiness as well as their ease to master receive an 8.5 out of 10. The gameplay for its time and even now is contrasting from a lot of the things that we'd seen before. Sly Cooper was released around the time that Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank were both released, which is probably why Sly Cooper was temporarily overlooked. And while those games are most certainly similar to the point that Naughty Dog, Insomniac Games, and Sucker Punch Productions have been given the moniker of Sony's platforming trio, Sly Cooper was one that incorporated stealth into the mix. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of moments where stealth is actually necessary in the game. You'll fight a couple guys that might shine a flashlight in your direction, but mostly it's an absolute free-for-all. Where it doesn't sink flat, however, is in the aerobatics and your ability to successfully turn your atmosphere in your own little personal jungle gym. The platforming involved in the game levels can be very entertaining. However, the enemies are way too easily conquered, and the game itself is too lenient as well. There were very little times throughout the entire game that I ever actually got stuck, and those moments were only whenever I couldn't figure out exactly what to do in a boss battle. Speaking of the boss battles, they weren't anything amazing either. They needed a lot more elaboration than what they got. Now, I'm not trying to say that I wanted something like Castlevania Lords of Shadow where the boss battles are extremely convoluted, but the extra mile is a lot longer than it seems, and I think it can go a long way. I think that the biggest problem with the boss battles were how formulaic they seemed. 1 or 2 of them were fun, but the others just felt uninspired. I'm not saying that it's a good thing when there are tons of moments where you get stuck in a game, or even saying how it depicts how hard a game is. While some might say that it's a good thing to be able to zoom through, which sometimes it is, all I'm saying is that this game had very little moments where challenge was involved. Through and through, the best boss battle out of them all is the one that we got at the end of the game, but even it only just barely met the standards that it should have had in my opinion. The gameplay, taking into account its fun levels, albeit a little too easy and with unattentive AI, successfully managed to whip out an 8.3 out of 10 from me. If you think that seems a little too positive, keep in mind that I do actually really like the gameplay of this game. However, there is only so much good that I can say and also justify my reasonings. Adding on to my miscellaneous praising about the music and ultimately the style about the game, I think that I should also say something about the length of the game. One of the biggest criticisms from critics was how short the game was. Now, I was ready to bash this game in high heavens myself. However, after replaying it, I have come to agreement with myself that the game is actually of decent length. Don't get me wrong, I do firmly believe, however, that the game could have been longer and should have been longer. There were plenty of moments of filler throughout the entire game, and I believe it never got to kick into a higher degree because of how short each levels were. Taking into account the easiness of the game really brings out the shortness and establishes why this game probably got lost in the crevice when it first came out. One of the developers of the game actually defended the shortness and length by saying that the game provided extra materials such as videos from the developers that you can unlock from beating the quick speed levels. The quick speed levels, they're pretty self-explanatory, but basically they're making you play the levels you've already done, but this time you are being timed. Yippee! Don't get me wrong, I enjoy seeing material from how a game is made, but by no means does that constitute as material from the actual game. Taking into account the shortness and length, the miscellaneous rating gets a 7 from me. This game was a very significant part of my childhood. I remember playing the hell out of it, and enjoying myself every step of the way. After I played the first one, I played the second one, and then the third. It's been a long time since I pursued or revisited the series. I only just recently played Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus after a 7 or 8 year break from it. Immediately I found myself hooked and felt like a youngin'. My eyes losing their keener and less criticizing depiction of every single little detail, and merely enjoying myself as a gamer. A lot of the times whenever people remember the games, they remember the memories in a fonder and more nostalgically flattering way. Like, for example, I choose to see A Nightmare on Elm Street as awesome, even though I realize that it's really, really bad. I like to pretend that Tim Burton's Batman doesn't exist and that we skip straight to Batman Begins. I don't like the 80s Batman movie. I don't. Never did. Thought Joker's origin was generic, didn't like that Joker killed Bruce's parents, and I strongly prefer Heath Ledger's performance as the sadistic Joker in comparison to Jack Nicholson's performance of a clown. Seriously, build animosity between characters without pulling things out of a hat. Blow up a hospital if you have to. Don't alterate and... Oops, sorry. My point was that when I played Sly Cooper again, it didn't feel like my past was inaccurate. This game really was just as entertaining and enjoyable as how I chose to remember it. In conclusion, my lasting impression and overall gaming experience from this game garners an 8 out of 10, same as the graphics, bringing my rating of the game to a lasting rating of 7.8 out of 10. Thanks for joining me on this edition of the Golden View here on the Masochist Gaming Network, and I'll see you next time.